Lab number 1, tensile testing. As always, be sure to read through your lab manual before coming to your lab session. First up, setting up and performing a tensile test on the metal sample tester. First, turn the tensile tester on with the power switch located on the bottom right. Next, open the TW Essential software, which you will use to control the tensile tester machine. Next, select the 3407 template from the Custom Templates tab. From the Testing Parameters page, lower the data acquisition rate to 30 Hz to make the test more efficient and lower the file size. Next, you're going to measure your sample for the initial dimensions before the test. First, you're going to measure the width. Make sure to take a measurement from the top, middle, and bottom of the gauge length to get an average reading. Turn it sideways, do the same thing for the thickness, and record your results. Take your results and input the average width and the average thickness into the test parameters page. Next, we're going to measure and mark the attachment points for the X-tensometer. Here, your TA Diego is showing a great way to keep track of all your work when doing this. First, measure your sample, the entire length, and divide that in half. The gauge length will be 50 millimeters, so add half of that, 25 millimeters, to half of your overall length, and you will find about 101.3 millimeters for this sample. Measure from one end to the other using that length and mark on those positions so that you have a 50 millimeter gauge length marked in the exact center of your sample. Here we're going to attach the X-tensometer to your tensile sample. Move the retaining clasps out of the way, and these are the knife edges which will line up with the Sharpie marks to indicate the gauge length for your tensile sample. This black pin is inserted to make sure the X-tensometer stays at 50 millimeters until you're ready for the test. Now, you're going to align the knife edges with the Sharpie marks on your tensile sample. Place the X-tensometer against your tensile sample and use the metal retaining clasps to hold them together for the time being. Get 2 small rubber bands from the little bag of rubber band pouches located near the tensile tester. We're going to stretch these small rubber bands across the 2 hooks located here on around each knife edge of the X-tensometer. Using the pick tool or your fingers, stretch a rubber band from one hook over the tensile sample to the other hook in order to keep your tensile sample planted firmly against the X-tensometer. Before plugging the X-tensometer into the tensile tester, make note of the letters located next to each pin on the plug. The plug coming from the tensile tester has letters corresponding to those pins on the X-tensometer. When connecting the two, there's a ring located around the edge of the one coming out of the tensile tester, which you must twist and will click and lock into place. Now, when you're mounting your tensile sample into the tensile tester, be sure that the shoulder of the tensile sample rests below the top of the grips. Use the turnstile at the bottom to tighten the grip head against your tensile sample. In order to use the frame controller, you must press the lock button on the top right of the controller. Then, you can use the up and down arrows to move the crossbeam all the way down to your sample. The little roller at the top will move the crossbeam in fine amounts, very small, so that you can precisely place your tensile sample into the tester. Again, be sure the shoulder of your tensile sample rests just above the end of the grip head. Same as below, use the turnstile to tighten the grip head against your tensile sample. Make sure it's nice and tight because there's going to be a large load placed on your sample. Make absolutely sure that you remove the pin from the X-tensometer before beginning your test. Right-click and zero the signal for load, crosshead, and X-tensometer on the computer before beginning the test. Time will run continuously. click the play button located at the top center of the screen in order to run the test. This will bring up a dialog box in which you could enter the test ID for your sample. Then, you will be prompted to confirm the width and thickness that you entered earlier for your sample. Click OK, and the test will begin. Once the test is complete, you will remove your sample from the tensile tester by first undoing the metal retention clasps and then removing the rubber bands you put on earlier. Once you remove the extensometer from your sample, reinsert the retaining pin into the extensometer. Then, you will begin to remove the lower half of your tensile sample by using the turnstile at the bottom to loosen the grip head and remove your piece of the sample. Remove the top half of your sample in the same fashion, using the turnstile to loosen the grip head and removing your half of the tensile sample. Next, you will be taking measurements for the final dimensions of your tensile sample. Using the calipers from earlier, measure the width of your sample at its narrowest point, and then measure the thickness of your sample at its thinnest point. To measure the final length of your tensile sample, place the two halves up against each other without the fracture surfaces touching, and then measure the length between the two black Sharpie marks you marked at the beginning. Input the results of your measurements into the boxes that show up after the test is completed on the computer. After you click OK, a report of the test will be generated, which will show you all the pertinent data relating to your tensile test. Clicking this button at the top left of the screen will allow you to generate an Excel sheet that will contain all the data of your tensile test, so that you can email it to yourself for use in your lab report later. Right-clicking on the stress-strain curve in the testing software and then clicking Copy Values will allow you to then paste those values into your Excel file so that you can create your own graph of the stress-strain curve for your own creative freedom to make it look how you'd like for your lab report to be turned in later. The data you paste is going to have a very large amount of numbers, so the easiest way to select all of them without scrolling all the way to the bottom is remove the words from the numbers, then select the top two numbers, hold Shift and press the down arrow, and that'll select all the numbers all the way to the end. As you can see, there are 4,300 lines of numbers, so scrolling all the way down would take forever. This way is much more efficient. With all your data selected, you can use the Insert tab at the top of the screen to then generate a scatter plot with lines of all your data. Now, looking at the graph that's created, you will see there are some negative values in the graph. Knowing that a tensile test won't have any negative values, you should go through your list of numbers and delete all the rows that have negative values for load. Now, with your graph all cleaned up, don't forget to give it a title. Next, we'll go over how to set up and perform a tensile test on the polymer sample tester, which varies just slightly from the metal tester. Open the valve for compressed air located on the wall to the left of the tensile tester so that it shows about 100 psi. Then, on the pressure regulator on the back left of the tensile tester, make sure it reads between 20 and 40 psi. In order to change it, pull the knob, then twist, then push it back into lock. Pressing the A button on the controller on the frame of the tensile tester will close the jaws on the lower grip head first, then pressing the A button again will close the jaws on the upper grip head. Pressing the B button will lower the pressure and release both grip heads at the same time. Before inserting your sample, make sure to measure and mark it the same way you did for the metal ones. Just as you did with your metal tensile sample, insert into the lower grip head and then make sure the shoulders are below the edge of the grip head and then press the A button to clamp it down. When placing the X tensometer on your sample, make sure the little black plastic knife edges line up with the Sharpie marks you made to indicate your gauge length. This alignment is easiest done with the X tensometer closed. In order to open and close it, use a lever behind the bottom crosshead and turn it left and right in order to open and close it. Once placed precisely, press the A button again to clamp the upper half of your sample. Beginning the test is the same procedure and software as it was for the metal samples. Good luck with your lab, and don't hesitate to ask your TA for help.